Hello, this is Nick Arena, and we're back to talk about the business culture in China, part 2 of our lecture. So back to Dongguan. Again, another view of the city, lots of good green spaces, lots of clean air in the background, the Chamber of Commerce view of Dongguan. Here's a McDonald's. Many of the American firms are growing rapidly in China, and you'll see lots of evidence of that. Although McDonald's is not the #1 franchise firm in China, it's actually KFC. And you can see many things you recognize, the logo, the 24-hour service. But one of the unique features here, adapting to the Chinese culture, is the fact that you don't have a drive-through window, you have a walk-up window to accommodate the fact that most of the people in China do not have cars. This is a traditional Chinese market where people would go every day to shop. They would buy their food fresh, meats, fish, poultry, vegetables, anything they needed. And it's all under one roof. Many little vendors in there selling their wares. And here's Walmart trying to get into that market. They're adapting. You can see that in this building, it's a 4-story building. Unlike the 1-floor buildings that we have, there's no parking lot. There actually are about 4 or 5 parking spaces in front of this Walmart. But it's a very different Walmart from what you would see in the United States. You would see fresh food. You would see live fish ready for sale, ready to be cleaned and prepared for the consumer. But I have to say that every time I've been to this Walmart, it has not been busy. So anecdotally, I'd have to say that while Walmart is growing in China, they're not growing as rapidly as you would think they could. So, business culture, and what do these firms and every firm have to deal with when they move to China? One is top-down decision-making. The Chinese firms that we dealt with all had senior managers, all made decisions at the top level. That's their culture. So we would have meetings where we would do a lot of technical things and come up with designs, that type of thing, but any kind of business decision was going to be made by senior managers. So you have to see who's in the room. If you don't have the right people in the room, there's not much point in you having a business discussion. So you can wait until the senior managers are available. Respect for elders. This goes deep in the Chinese culture. They take care of their parents and their grandparents. And you'll see the same thing in the business community. The elders in the room usually have a large say in the outcome of the meeting. So pay attention to that. Size people up, understand what their responsibilities are. The younger people in the room will often make a lot of the technical decisions, but they may even be reviewed later by the elders. So, formal meetings, very structured. Unlike many US companies, the Chinese meetings tend to be very structured, very formal. People pay attention to who sits where, who speaks for which side. It's a little bit different than what we're used to here in the States. These types of meetings would take place during the day. Probably a typical day for me would be breakfast with senior managers from the company, quite often the owner of the company. That might last for an hour or two in my hotel, and then 3 or 4 hours of meetings at their plant before we broke for lunch, which might be an hour or two, and then back to the plant for 3 or 4 more hours of meetings before we broke and went to dinner, and then out for entertainment. So it's a long day, and you have to be prepared for that. And you can't fall into the trap of saying, well, I'm going to skip lunch today and catch up on my emails or my work back home, make a few phone calls, which you'll be waking people up in the middle of the night if you do that. But it's just not acceptable for you to do that. You have to take part in the entire day's activity. Saving face. This is a very important thing in the Chinese culture, where it's acceptable in the US to perhaps use peer pressure and in a group setting, put people on the spot for something that's not being done on time or the way it should be done, that's not acceptable in China. And you will really have great difficulty if you do that. Now, you can discuss with a business partner almost anything you want, one-on-one. You can express your displeasure. You can tell them about deadlines that are missed. You can tell them about specifications that aren't met. That can all be discussed. But it really needs to be a one-on-one discussion with the responsible party that can fix whatever's going wrong and save face for them in front of their peers and their elders. Okay. Entertainment. This is important. I mentioned the meals. That's one way that the Chinese like to entertain. But after dinner, what they tend to like to do is go to places like a traditional Chinese foot massage or perhaps a karaoke bar where they'll sing and drink and just generally relax and enjoy themselves. You'll be expected to go with them. And again, it's not one of these things that is optional. You need to go. You don't need to do anything that you wouldn't normally do, but you do need to go. And when it comes to drinking, it's part of their culture. They have a drink called Baijiu that I will caution you on. It's Chinese white lightning. What I learned the hard way was that you just want to take your first glass of that and sip it for the rest of the evening. If you empty the glass, they will refill it, and it won't take many. So, a male-dominated management team. Women have not made it through the glass ceiling in China. They haven't even made it to the glass ceiling in China. So most of the firms that we dealt with and deal with today have male managers, and they're the people making the decisions. That doesn't mean you don't treat the women with respect, but you can't expect them to make decisions if you need something done. So many women that have a title that would imply in the US that they were a manager of some type are actually an administrative assistant working for a similar functional area. So a marketing manager might actually be administrative assistant for the marketing department. Most people are bilingual. In fact, in southern China, where I worked most of the time, they're actually trilingual. They speak the local dialect, which is Cantonese. And when I say dialect, it's not really a dialect, it's a language. And it's the language that they've been speaking for hundreds of years there. They also speak Mandarin, which is the official Chinese, which is, again, the local dialect in Beijing. And they speak English. Because in southeastern China, they've been so close to Hong Kong, and many of the business people have actually lived in Hong Kong and may have been born in Hong Kong. They speak English very well. And you won't really be called upon to learn Chinese, and there won't be a big need for you to have a translator because all your business discussions will be in English. But I will tell you that it wouldn't hurt at all for you to learn a few words. If you can say hello, ni hao, it'll be recognized and it'll be respected that you've done that. So, regional differences. I mentioned the language. There are other regional differences that you may encounter. As I said before, in southeastern China, where a lot of manufacturing takes place, particularly electrical and electronic, the people speak Cantonese. The people are a bit more westernized. They're used to dealing with Western business people. As you get into other parts of the country, you'll find that may not be the case. Contracts. I said here that written contracts are worth less than your word. That's just a fact in China. They expect your word and they expect you to live up to whatever you tell them you'll do. And they're not as influenced by the written contract. So you may reach an agreement in a written contract and they'll understand that you need to have that, but they'll also expect you to live up to things you say that are not covered by the contract. And that's more important than the contract. The last bullet here talks about the party. And I do mean the Communist Party. And you will be dealing with business people who have to answer to the Communist Party. One thing that would be important would be to find out if your business partners are members of the Communist Party, because that will help your business relationship. They will be able to get more things done than somebody who's not. And they aren't all necessarily members. The other thing is that the party makes the rules, and the rules may change. So from time to time, you may visit China. I can recall simple things like visiting China, being only allowed to get a 30-day visa. Next trip, maybe I could get a 6-month visa, maybe then a year's visa. Now I'm currently traveling under a 2-year visa. But these things change and they move back and forth. The next time I go to renew, I may be back to 30 days. I'll never know. So the party has a lot of influence, and you need to pay attention to what's going on with the government. Now, culture's changing, it's being westernized, but it's slow to change. And I said before that the elders deserve respect, and the top-down decision-making means that the people that you'll be dealing with on big issues are not part of the cultural change. This picture speaks a lot to that. If you look at the building in the front, it's 100% occupied. It's an older building. I wouldn't have any idea how old. It's very dilapidated, but it's 100% populated. If you look at the buildings in the back, they're much newer, much more modern, built to Western standards. They're not fully occupied. In fact, they may be 50% or even less occupied. And in fact, there are whole cities in China that are not occupied, referred to as the ghost cities. So the culture's changing, but it's not changing that fast. This is the type of shop or shopping street that the Chinese like to use. This is small shops owned by families, merchandise, a whole wide variety of merchandise, frankly not of the quality standards that you would accept. So my recommendations: learn the culture, understand what you're dealing with, including nationally and regionally. Learn some of the language, if only a few words. You should be able to say hello, and it'll be noticed. Be prepared to compromise. You're not always going to get your way. You're not going to get everything you want. The Chinese like to negotiate. They will negotiate for a long time. Expect change. You think you understand China, and things change. So just expect that. And don't forget, you're in a country with a command economy. What that means is that the government controls the economy. They say how much is going to be built, what is going to be built. And so if you're not dealing with people that can influence that command economy, you will find things very difficult. Okay. So thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this class.